Today on Inside the Issues, I speak with Philip Brenner on the U.S. presidential election. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Inside the Issues, a CG online podcast. I'm David Welch, CG Chair of Global Security at the Balsillie School of International Affairs and Professor of Political Science at the University of Waterloo. Every week I'm very happy to welcome into the studios here at the Center for International Governance Innovation a guest who's an expert on some issue in international affairs or international public policy. And today I'm very happy to welcome Philip Brenner, Professor of International Relations at American University, School of International Service in Washington, D.C. And we're going to do something a little different this week. We're going to talk about something timely and hot, which is next week's U.S. presidential election, and specifically talk about the question of whether it makes any difference to U.S. foreign policy and to the world. Who wins, Mitt Romney or Barack Obama? So welcome, Phil. Very glad to have you here. It's good to have a distinguished expert on U.S. foreign policy who actually lives and breathes inside the Beltway as an insider perspective, as well as a scholarly perspective on what's at stake in next week's election. So before we begin, maybe we can hear a little bit about your thoughts specifically about the third presidential debate, which was on foreign policy. And most commentators seem to be saying at the end of that debate that there wasn't as much difference between the two candidates as people would have expected. Was that your impression? And if so, do you think that was, to a first approximation, a credible read on what we could expect from a Romney presidency and an Obama presidency?
Well, what to expect on the basis of the debate is one thing. I think it was an accurate read about the debate. And I think that Romney was attempting to show that he was a reasonable candidate, that he was not the captive of the extreme right wing, because during the primaries, he seemed like a rabid extremist. And that scared people. They want someone who is calm with their finger on the button. They don't want an extremist. While the extreme right wing would like to see blood and gore, most people want a commander-in-chief who is deliberate. So Romney came across that way, and in fact his policy prescriptions were really very close to what Obama had, and Obama's prescriptions were not that far from what President Bush had. Right. So both were playing that same game.
Right, so during the Republican primaries, Romney was obviously sort of tacking to the right to sort of, because that's where the battleground was. It was sort of the Tea Party vote, who could capture that,
exactly,
probably capture the nomination. So to help us understand that, when the Tea Party thinks about international affairs, and specifically U.S. foreign policy, what would they like to see? What's the Tea Party perspective on the United States' role in the world?
Well, the Tea Party is actually divided. Part of the Tea Party is very isolationist and would like the United States to give up any major role in the world and stay home, not provide foreign aid, have a protectionist economic policy, not engage with other countries very much. And then there's part of the Tea Party that would like an aggressive U.S. foreign policy that aims at primacy and clear U.S. dominance in an aggressive way, sometimes with what had been called the neoconservative agenda, trying to promote democracy or a version that the United States claims is democracy. But at times, they want to use military power as much as possible. They think that it's not something to be held in reserve, but to be used to show that we in fact are powerful. So there's a split even within the Tea Party as to what that would mean. I think Romney, during the campaign, was listening to the more aggressive, primacy-oriented Tea Party members.
Mm-hmm. But that distinction within the Tea Party that you mentioned actually has quite a long pedigree in
yes,
U.S. foreign policy.
There's a libertarian streak in the Tea Party that favors an isolationist kind of stance, smaller government. To be isolationist means you'd have a smaller military, for example, and the libertarians don't like a large military.
Right. Now, Romney hasn't said a whole lot about foreign policy during the post-primary election campaign phase, and the received wisdom there is that Americans don't vote on foreign policy, so there's not much upside to talking about it. But he has spoken about specific issues a little bit more frequently than others. What's your read on what he's been saying on those?
He's appealed to voters who care about Israel. It's often thought that this is Jewish voters in the United States, but who he's really appealing to are evangelical Christians, who now make up about a third of the so-called Israel lobby in the United States. And they care about Israel not giving up Jerusalem to Palestinians, and because they think holy sites will be damaged. So they want a very vigorous, aggressive, militaristic policy. And Romney talked to that by saying we should put no daylight between the United States and Israel. Now he's talking a little bit more moderately. That's a very dangerous thing to allow the United States, which has so many nuclear weapons, which is so powerful, to be essentially manipulated by a smaller country that does not have the same foreign policy interests that the United States has.
Mm-hmm. And do you think Romney's discussion of the Iran issue is completely connected with the Israel issue, or is there some sort of independent?
Well, it's hard to say if it's completely connected. It certainly follows the most conservative Israeli line, yes. It may even go further than the military in Israel would have it. It follows Netanyahu's line. But on the other hand, I think his concern about Iran mimics what their right-wing U.S. senators are saying about not allowing Iran to threaten Middle East interests that the United States has, to essentially remove a potential competitor for the United States in the Middle East.
Very good. We'll be back in a moment again with Philip Brenner. You're watching or listening to Inside the Issues, a CG Online podcast. Look for us at cgonline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Welcome back. So, sticking with the theme of Israel and Iran, in the third presidential debate, I noticed that Obama went up 3-0 on the Israel score sheet. He talked about Israel 3 times before Romney mentioned it at all. And when Romney finally did talk about Israel, he more or less said what the president said. So how would you characterize the difference that was evident during the debate? And do you really think that we would see sort of the minimalist difference there carry through U.S. foreign policy after the election next week?
Well, the way in which people have described the Obama policy serves Governor Romney very well, because it's been described as a policy that's been hard on Israel, that has antagonized the Israeli government. The reality is that the Bush administration, prior to President Obama, put much tougher conditions on what it was asking Israel to do and trying to limit Israel's capacity to act independently much more. The Obama administration has not done very much very specifically. What it has done is reached out to the Arab states around Israel. And in doing so, that's what's angered the right wing in the United States, feeling that these are people you have to be tough with, that you can't work with. And then that's compounded by the allegations that Obama is really Muslim origin. His father was Muslim, that Obama's father was anti-imperial, and so the U.S. policy in the Middle East is seen as apologizing for what has happened in the past, which was claimed to be. So all of these claims feed one another without any real basis in fact. Netanyahu does not like Obama. That's pretty clear. And that's because Obama actually makes demands on Israel about things that the rest of the world is making demands of, that Israel, in fact, be a democracy, be more transparent, human rights violations, the way in which Israel uses its military in Gaza Strip. Those are quite reasonable demands, far less than the United States demands, certainly of what it's saying towards Arab countries. But even that slightest bit of criticism is seen as somehow weakening Israel, which it's not. I think Netanyahu weakens Israel by creating more enemies around the world. Romney has said nothing that in the past that would anger Netanyahu. So Netanyahu virtually has supported President Romney. And I mean, when the president did not meet with any state leaders in his trip to the UN this year, and yet it was pointedly said he did not meet with Netanyahu. It was true he didn't meet with Netanyahu, but he didn't meet with anyone else. And yet it was pointed out that he didn't meet with Netanyahu, and this was seen as a slap at Israel. And so this is domestic politics in an ugly way. And I think in the debate, again, Romney was trying to be above board. What he said prior is what's really dangerous, because it makes it very difficult for the United States to be a kind of honest broker in a Middle East peace if the Arab countries believe that the United States is really nothing but being pulled by Israel, and there is no daylight between the two countries. I think they'll remember that. But if Romney were president, he would have a much greater burden in convincing them that the United States can play the role of honest broker than President Obama would.
Do you think Obama has tried in the first 4 years?
Not very effectively. He did appoint former Senator Mitchell to attempt to do something, but he has not followed up in the same way that, say, President Clinton did. But I think that part of that problem has been what's been going on in the Middle East in general, where I don't think the opportunities were as great for peace with Israel as they were during the Clinton administration. And so I think he could be faulted for not maybe trying as hard as he should have, but I don't know that trying harder would have helped very much.
Now, do you think the Republican campaign would be in a good position to say that Obama's actually discovered what Republicans have been saying all along with respect to Iran, which is that you can't be nice, you can't sit down, you can't just offer to talk to these people because nothing will happen. What you have to do is be tough. And arguably, Obama's being very tough right now with Iran.
He's being very tough. He's not being quite as tough as some Republicans would have it. They want to draw a line where Israel is drawing the line. And that is at the point when Iran would have the capability of producing a nuclear weapon, that's when we should attack Iran. Obama's position is if they build a nuclear bomb, that's when we would attack. And so he's doesn't draw the line in the same place. I think it's dangerous when you draw any line. What we learned in the Cuban Missile Crisis, and this is the 50th anniversary of the Cuban Missile Crisis, is that when President Kennedy drew a line on September 4th, 1962, saying there were, and his CIA had told him this, that there were no nuclear missiles in Cuba, he said if the United States discovered the Soviets had put nuclear missiles in Cuba, use any and all means to take them out. It was totally unacceptable. In 1989, you had organized with James Blight and Janet Lang a conference in Moscow. And at that conference, as I'm sure you well recall, Theodore Sorensen, President Kennedy's counsel, said if Kennedy had thought that the Soviets had put 36 ballistic missiles in Cuba, he would have drawn the line at 50. He would have said, if they put more than 50 in, we'll do something. He did not want to confront the Soviet Union, but he drew a line at 0 because he thought there were none in there. And it's very dangerous when you draw a line because then the president felt he had to live up to that statement that he had made. And unfortunately, if President Obama feels he has to live up to his statement with respect to Iran, we could be in a very dangerous period. But aside from that, I think President Obama has been tough with Iran, but the New York Times reported on Sunday that there are rumors, and I think they're credible rumors, that the administration has reached a hand out to have negotiations with Iran, which is a very important thing to do. To be able to talk to your adversary and try to understand the kinds of fears they have, because part of their building a bomb is not about their aggressiveness, but about their defensiveness. They feel thoroughly threatened by the United States. And after all, Israel has 200 nuclear weapons, and at this point, Iran has none.
Very good. We'll be back again with Philip Brenner. You're watching or listening to Inside the Issues, a CG Online podcast. Look for us at cgonline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Welcome back. So obviously the Middle East, Iran, that's been one relatively hot topic in the campaign. Other things have not been as hot a topic, but Barack Obama early in his presidency did try to reach out to the third world, to Africa and so on, in ways that US presidents typically hadn't done for a very long time. In fact, John F. Kennedy was one of the last presidents who did that in any sort of energetic way. What would we expect in the next 4 years from Obama on relations with the third world, specifically possibly relations with Africa and Latin America? And what would we expect by way of contrast with Romney?
Unfortunately, though Obama, you'd think would have been sensitive to the third world. He lived in Indonesia. His father came from Kenya. He grew up in a family where that paid attention to other countries and tried to, in fact, be empathetic. His policy towards, I think, much of the third world has been colored by wonderful rhetoric and no follow-up. And the third world countries have not been pleased with that. In Latin America, for example, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton has made more trips to Latin America than any secretary has ever made, and has sent high-level emissaries there regularly. But Latin Americans are very angry at the United States. They feel the United States has we say a tin ear. They can't hear exactly what the Latin Americans are saying. So that at the last Summit of the Americas, Canada attended, at the last Summit of the Americas, that President Santos of Colombia said to, on behalf of the other presidents attending, that if Cuba were not allowed to come to the next summit, that there would be no summit. Now, it totally shocked President Obama. He had no idea that they felt that way. He fired his national security advisor for Latin America when they got back to Washington because he was so shocked by this. But he shouldn't have been shocked. If he had asked any Latin American specialist in Washington, they would have said, Latin America is very upset with you because they think that you've ignored them. Now, it is a tradition for the United States to ignore Latin America when there aren't big problems there. But Latin America is has grown to become a very important area and thinks of itself now much more independent than the United States. It's not reliable any longer for us. Brazil is now an important country. Mexico is an important country, and part of Mexico is ungovernable and is adjacent to the United States. And so ignoring Latin America is really at US own peril as we pay attention to Afghanistan in our own neighborhood where are not at all well liked. In Africa, there is the only thing that is appreciated in Africa is the large amount of money being spent on HIV/AIDS and the Millennium Challenge account. But we have not made great inroads in Africa because of our efforts to create an African military force that's not appreciated, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa. And the president has actually largely ignored Africa. He hasn't traveled there very much. So that's a concern. In Asia, the big problem is China. The president has articulated that Asia is now our new greater security area. He's building up bases in Australia for this purpose. There's a growing Cold War in Asia where China, it's their neighborhood, and China doesn't like the United States muzzling in this way. Japan doesn't know which way to go and is uncertain about how to relate to the United States or to relate to China. There are several problems in Asia that haven't yet been worked out. And the United States is acting as if it can go in there with impunity, and China is not at this point ready to allow the United States to do that. So I think in terms of the third world, there have been real problems. And
Romney's spoken much more hardline on China than Obama has. On Latin America and Africa,
he's ignored it.
More or less.
Well, he says he'll have a policy in Latin America that will unify the whole region with his free trade program. That's a fantasy. That's not what everyone wants in Latin America. Even the countries that are moderately conservative, and there are no longer any real right-wing countries, and even Chile, which has a right-wing government, has large social safety net programs that would be considered left-wing in the United States. The countries are not going to respond well to any initiative that Romney makes of that sort. So I think that's fantasy. He's been hardline on saying, you have to follow us. It's our way or the highway. And that's no longer the way the third world is going to relate.
But the biggest difference between the two in the third world would be China. That would be your read.
Well, I think the president is much more sensitive to China's sensitivities. And I think Romney is not in any way, though he claims to understand China because he has investments there, and maybe those would temper his concerns. I think the issue is the military that concerns China the most. And Romney talking about increasing the size of the military, there'd be only one purpose for that, and that would be to counter China. The president is intent on both decreasing the military, and in fact, both of Romney and Obama might be constrained by congressional legislation that will force a quarter of the military budget to be cut. Now, if that happens, it probably will not injure the United States very much at all. The military budget of the United States is over $700 billion. It's actually hard for us to imagine how big a budget like that is. If I gave you $1,000 a second, and I gave it to you every second, it would take 22 years to amount to $700 billion. That's an awful lot of money.
It certainly is. We'll be back one last time with Philip Brenner. You're watching or listening to Inside the Issues, a CG Online podcast. Look for us at cgonline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube. Welcome back. So I would like to talk about the spending issue a bit more in a second, but before I do, I want to make sure we don't miss talking about Cuba, which is one country that you're particularly familiar with. Over the course of the next 4 years, it's very easy to imagine a serious generational transition in Cuba's leadership, and possibly even some interesting changes in how Cuba does its business politically. So would it make a difference if there's an Obama presidency or a Romney presidency as to how the United States might react to that possible change?
Well, largely U.S. policy towards Cuba is driven by domestic constituency. And the generational change is not only occurring in Cuba, it's occurring in Miami, where the older people who have a visceral dislike for the Castro family, those people are dying away. Now, those people have largely been able to control politics, not just because they vote, but because of money they provide. And it gets complicated in the United States, but for example, the chairwoman of the Democratic National Committee, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, comes from South Florida. Her constituents are largely Jewish. They care about Israel, and she is a staunch supporter of the Israeli government. And she doesn't need personal money to get reelected, but she collects money from Cuban Americans who are wealthy and uses that to give to Israeli fence sitters, members of Congress who are on the fence, to encourage them to vote along with her in support of Israel. And in turn, she makes sure legislation that goes through the Congress supports their position on Cuba. So it's the Congress at this point that's the greatest obstacle
to log rolling.
Log rolling, and because it doesn't seem to matter to the president very much, he goes along with that. He'd rather, he has other considerations in dealing with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and so those kinds of issues get lost. It would make sense for the United States and Cuba to have better relations, as it's so clear how Canada and Cuba can disagree about things. Canada has been outspoken about Cuban human rights violations and any number of other things, but Canadians flock to the Cuban beaches, and Canadians invest in Cuba quite successfully. And it does provide a way in which Canada can talk to Cuba about things where there are bilateral disagreements. So with the United States being even closer geographically, it makes sense.
But it's an issue where the executive doesn't actually have much leverage.
The executive chooses not to have much leverage, yes.
Interesting. So the campaign so far has been largely a domestic politics campaign and an economy campaign. And both Romney and Obama have been making the case that they should be elected because they're better producers, more likely better producers of jobs over the next 4 years, can get the budget in order and so forth and so on. What are the international political ramifications of the United States having to retrench militarily for fiscal reasons, having to do a better job balancing its books, reducing its sovereign debt? Are we going to see inevitably a rapid decline in America's global role, no matter who the president is?
No, I think it's impossible for the United States to reduce its global role. The United States is so entwined with the major international institutions that it still remains, even though it no longer has a veto in institutions like the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank, it still retains the largest voting share. The nature of the relationship that the United States has with the rest of the world is what's going to become important. And I think you're right in suggesting that the ability of the United States to affect international affairs is going to be reduced. The United States, the question is the extent to which the United States appreciates that. And so to that extent, if the United States recognizes its reduced ability, it will work in a more cooperative way with Europe in particular, with China, with Russia, finding ways in which there can be win-win solutions, ways in which the technical expertise can be shared equally. If the United States doesn't understand its decline, and Americans have a great difficulty doing that. President Obama repeats we're going to be number one, and it's a very that satisfying a domestic constituency at the same time that wants us to be number one, doesn't like the idea of our being second, and at the same time recognizing that language doesn't sit well with any other country is a difficult, thin line to walk. But I think President Obama, more than President Romney, appreciates the limits of U.S. power and be more inclined to be cooperative. President Romney, if he were president, would be more likely to be aggressive and then be shocked by the reaction. And that is where danger can come in. It's like an elephant in a china shop that all of a sudden gets a tack in its paw, foot, whatever elephants things are called, right. And then jumps up in horror. Right. And that's the danger.
So what would you expect the single biggest difference would be between a President Obama and a President Romney over the next 4 years in foreign policy specifically?
I think it's the biggest difference will be the amount of rope, how much flexibility the president gives to the military to act on its own. I think President Romney would give special forces, covert operations, much freer rein than President Obama would, not understanding how dangerous that could be because they have their own culture. And they very easily could get us, embroil us in accidental events that could lead to a kind of Holocaust, particularly with the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. I think President Obama has learned some lessons in his first term, the way the military has tried to manipulate him, and would be much more skeptical about claims they might make.
And are there specific regions of the world that you would worry about particularly in that respect?
Well, I think that certainly at the moment, Iran, the Middle East, I think Pakistan is a very troublesome area where we have not yet figured out how to work with Pakistan.
Pakistan hasn't figured out how to work with Pakistan either.
Maybe not.
Thanks, Phil, for coming in and helping us understand what's at stake in next week's election. And to our audience, thank you for joining us. And join us again next week for another episode of Inside the Issues, a CG online podcast. Look for us at cgonline.org, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on YouTube.